The Cost of Clarity. A Man No Longer Welcome at the Table. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. It began not with innocence but with precision, measured, intentional, grounded in the earned suspicion that truth, when spoken plainly, provokes not dialogue, but quiet retaliation. The silence I encountered was not surprising, but clarifying. It confirmed what I already feared, that the real danger was never in what I said, but in daring to say it out loud, without apology. Like Alyosha stepping into the world, believing love alone could save it, I mistook clarity for sanctuary. Alyosha's path was one of spiritual purity, but even he could not avoid the torment of witnessing a world that rejected both love and truth. In his journey, as in mine, the painful confirmation came, not of naivety, but of what had long been suspected, that goodness alone, when placed before power, is seen not as noble, but as naive, and treated with contempt. The cost was not only disillusionment, but a deeper exile from community, from certainty, from the illusion that truth is enough to be heard. But good faith, as history has shown, is often the first offering laid on the altar of suffering. It is a sacred ignorance, a fallible human hope that what is right will also be welcomed. I wrote a book, not a bomb, not a manifesto, not a cry for blood, but a demand, a call for something far more dangerous in this age of managed truths and manufactured obedience, a demand for thought. The case for an intellectual revolution in Rwanda was not written in anger. It was written in urgency. It was written out of the unshakable belief that a nation must think critically, honestly, without permission, if it is to remain worthy of its own name. And yet I underestimated the cost. I had suspected long before that the value of ideas would be met not with engagement, but with punishment. I simply wanted to believe there was still room for thought amid obedience, that a society could bear the light pressure of critique without collapsing into defensiveness or denial, that a government or a class of thinkers or even a weary public might rise briefly, tentatively, to the invitation to reflect rather than retreat. I gave an interview. I sat beneath the lights, across from the calm interrogator, and I spoke not of insurrection or revolution in the streets, but of revolution in the mind. A revolution that dares to remember, to critique, to question. A revolution that does not ask for power, but for honesty. That I now know was no mistake, but a calculated risk, a gamble taken with full awareness that honesty, though costly, was the only currency left that had not been debased. It was then that the toll began. Not suddenly. There were no knocks on the door, no threats delivered in the night. The machinery of silencing is more sophisticated now. It operates by subtraction. Invitations disappear. Colleagues grow cautious. You find yourself increasingly difficult to place. You are told, never directly, of course, that your presence is inconvenient, that your voice, once welcomed, has become too sharp, too unpredictable. You feel the walls shift, and then you realize the room was not built for you. It only ever tolerated you, so long as you stayed silent or said things they already believed. This, then, is the price of the ticket, the cost of being permitted to speak, but choosing to say something true. The world claims to admire freedom of thought, but that admiration dies the moment thought becomes uncomfortable, when the mind dares to confront not only the state, but the soul. As the great tragedies of thought have shown, man does not live by truth alone. He clings to illusion like a child to his blanket, fearing the divine reckoning that truth might demand. For some, the lie is not a deception, but a sanctuary, and those who threaten to dismantle it risk becoming heretics, not heroes. They want thinkers who think within the lines, revolutionaries whose revolutions can be sold on posters, academics who wear their credentials like camouflage. But if you strip away the euphemisms, if you point to the rot beneath the paint, then suddenly you are no longer constructive. You are no longer respectable. You become instead a threat. But what else should I have done? To refuse to think deeply, to refuse to speak honestly, to bury one's own clarity for the sake of approval, is that not a form of slow death? I understand now that they do not fear lies. Lies are useful. Lies uphold things, especially in a world that has exiled God and replaced him with the machinery of comfort and control. The lie is not simply deception, it is a refuge from the abyss. To confront truth without God is to risk madness. It requires the spiritual courage of a martyr, like Janani Luwum, who stood before the brutality of Idi Amin with the quiet resolve of one who believed truth was worth dying for. His body was broken, but his conviction endures. In such figures we glimpse not abstractions, but the lived cost of uncompromising truth. Better to remain in chains, they think, than to walk freely into a truth that demands sacrifice. What they fear is a man who no longer needs to lie to himself. That kind of man is dangerous because he cannot be bought. And here, perhaps, I must make a final confession. I do not regret paying the price. I regret only that I once thought the ticket was free. I now know that anyone who tells the truth in a frightened society must be prepared to live on the margins of that society, margins that are intellectual, social, and deeply spiritual. You are exiled not only from institutions and platforms, but from the unspoken belonging that binds people in shared illusion. You walk through public spaces as a stranger, even to those who once called you friend, because you have broken the silent contract of denial. But the estrangement does not end at the threshold of the external world. It seeps inward. You begin to question the worth of your defiance, to feel the gnawing ache of spiritual solitude. Doubt, once a companion to thought, becomes an intruder. The silence around you is mirrored by a silence within, a hollow space where certainty once lived. But the margins, it turns out, are where vision becomes possible, where you see the architecture of control clearly, where your voice, unguarded, begins to sound like your own. Let them keep their institutions, their seats at the table, their empty rituals of inclusion. I will mourn what is lost, opportunity, but communion, the soft and often unnoticed grace of belonging. It is the echo of earlier exiles, the quiet forfeiture of shared language and mutual recognition. What begins as intellectual defiance ends in spiritual homelessness, a condition of standing apart not only from the state, but from the comforting illusions that once tethered me to others. The cost is not only public, but intimate, not only political, but sacred. There is tragedy in the exile of the thinking man, as experience teaches us. The price of intellectual integrity is not just isolation, but a severance from the warmth of shared delusion. Yet still, I choose it. Better to walk with ghosts in truth than dine with the living in deceit. I will keep my integrity. I will keep my mind. I will continue to think, even if I must do so in exile, because ideas, real ideas, do not need permission. They do not die when ignored. They burn quietly until the day they ignite everything. And when that day comes, perhaps this ticket and the price I paid for it will have been worth it. For even in exile, I cling to the hope that suffering is not without meaning, though at times I wonder whether this hope is itself a form of self-preservation, a necessary illusion to keep despair at bay. Perhaps redemption is not guaranteed, only yearned for. Perhaps we bear this cross not in certainty, but in a trembling shadow of faith, that as many suffering souls have come to believe, out of the crucible of pain may come redemption. Perhaps this lonely truth-telling, this wandering in the wilderness, is not the end, but the beginning of resurrection, a resurrection not just of the soul, but of public conscience. It may take the form of a slow, halting reawakening, communities that begin to remember how to listen, institutions that tremble under the weight of long-denied truth, voices once silenced finding one another again. In such moments, something like grace might stir, not as reward, but as recognition, not for me alone, but for all who still dare to believe that light exists beyond the shadows, and that grace, though hidden, is never absent. And if not, then let me burn truth into the silence until I am ash.